Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Hazlitt. I'm a volunteer with the Soo Climate Hub, and I'll be hosting tonight's webinar. The Soo Climate Hub would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Robinson Huron Treaty Territory, and that the land on which we're physically and virtually gathered is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, specifically the Garden River and Batchewana First Nations, as well as Métis people. A little bit before I want to give you a little bit of information about the Soo Climate Hub. We're a nonpartisan group of concerned citizens of Sault Ste. Marie and surrounding areas. Our mission is to advance climate change mitigation and adaptation to align our region with regional, scientific, aspirational, and global targets for greenhouse gas emissions. We are a member of a group called the Climate Reality Project of Canada. That's a charitable organization that serves as the Canadian component of a global movement to look at the science and impacts of climate change and to provide solutions to address the climate crisis. Our focus of the Soo Climate Hub is local through action, education, and engagement. It includes this webinar series, a quarterly e-newsletter, and other activities in the Soo and Algoma. You can connect with on social media or by email that you see on the screen there. And please contact us if you're interested in receiving our e-newsletter or volunteering with the Soo Climate Hub. It's my pleasure tonight to introduce our presenter. Jonathan Kirkle is a registered professional planner with the City of Sault Ste. Marie. Jonathan was born and raised in Toronto. He worked with Maps and Planning Support Alberta Capital Region in Edmonton prior to joining the Sault Ste. Marie's Planning Division in 2017. In his current role, he focuses on development, planning, municipal policy, and long-range planning projects to realize the city's vision for a sustainable and vibrant community. Jonathan's presentation tonight is on active transportation and the Sault Ste. Marie Active Transportation Master Plan. Thanks, Jonathan, for joining us tonight, and I'll pass the floor to you.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen now. Is everyone able to see my screen? Works? Okay, great. So yeah, I'm Jonathan Kirkle. I'm an urban planner with the City of Sault Ste. Marie. Been working with the city for the past few years. As mentioned, to date, I've largely been working on development planning, land use policy. However, my role has changed recently, and therefore I am more involved in these types of projects, such as this one, the Active Transportation Master Plan project. The city is working with WSP, which is a large consulting firm with expertise in engineering, architecture, landscape architecture, with a particular expertise in active transportation, to develop an active transportation master plan. My presentation will be divided into 6 components, where I will begin by explaining the guiding inputs that have influenced the direction of the AT plan, the overall vision and objectives, the existing physical and social conditions of the city, the criteria used to identify candidate routes, and then identifying the draft set of active transportation candidate routes. We have created a project webpage that contains opportunities for the public to share their feedback. It also has 2 discussion papers that further speak to this project. More discussion papers will be released in the coming weeks. I will explain a bit more of that later on in the presentation. This project is still in its public engagement phase. A number of different stakeholders were identified, and WSP has touched base with them, as well as my department has reached out to our own set of stakeholders just for the sake of public engagement and gaining input. I'm hoping to ramp up more of a public engagement piece during the summertime. I'm hoping to put more pop-up booths located at various city events, such as Downtown Fest, hopefully Rotary Fest, once again, just for the purposes of raising awareness and getting as much feedback from the public as possible. Further consultation with other city departments such as Engineering Division, Public Works, Tourism, and the Conservation Authority have also been scheduled just to gain more of that technical perspective. Throughout the presentation, I'll be using AT and ATMP as abbreviations for Active Transportation and Active Transportation Master Plan. So what is active transportation? Active transportation is simply using your own power to get from one place to another, rather than using a motorized form of transportation, such as a vehicle. So this includes walking, biking, skateboarding, and non-mechanized wheelchairing, and more. An active transportation plan is therefore a long-term strategic plan that aims to improve these active forms of transportation for everyone, regardless of one's age, skill, and ability. Essentially, an active transportation plan envisions a community with more walking and cycling, safer walking and cycling, and more places for walking and cycling. A culture for active transportation and the encouragement of such is also envisioned. So why are we doing this? Across the continent and other parts of the world, active transportation planning at both large and small scales is being recognized as central to addressing major transportation-related health and environmental challenges, as well as addressing transportation inequity. There are a lot of benefits to AT infrastructure, and it is increasingly being recognized that designing for motor vehicles is not sustainable in the long run. So benefits include promoting healthier lifestyles, advancing equity amongst vulnerable residents, reducing air and noise pollution, as well as greenhouse gases, and the frequency and severity of pedestrian and cyclist injuries due to collisions. When done right, it is a community asset that benefits all people, all ages and abilities. The AT plan for the city is not entirely a new concept. In fact, I would see it as building off of the existing infrastructure and policies and plans that have materialized over the past years. The hub trail, multi-use paths, and the number of bike lanes along, for example, Queen, Pine, Willow, Willoughby, North and Northern, as well as Bay Street, and within the downtown are all examples of existing infrastructure that will be built off of. From a policy perspective, the city's official plan, the transportation master plan, the cycling master plan, and the parks and recreational master plan all articulate a foundation for alternative modes of transportation. All of these policies and documents were reviewed to ensure that the final product of the active transportation plan is aligned with the overall vision and objectives of the city. Examples of key direction found within these documents relate to provisions for diverse leisure and recreational opportunities, health and quality of life, linear recreational opportunities, environmental and social economic benefits, access to parks, bus stops, schools, energy efficient forms of transportation. The policy review established a clear vision for the role of active transportation within our community. This vision statement has undergone some changes. It has evolved over time as a result of new information obtained through our engagement sessions with other city staff, departments, as well as our stakeholders and the public. So here I'll read the vision statements. It is, Sault Ste. Marie is a place where it is easy for people of all ages and abilities to choose active transportation. A safe, accessible, and connected network links the hub trail to all destinations within the city, allowing people to walk, bike, or wheel for both transportation and recreation, creating a more inclusive, connected, and climate-friendly city for generations to come. There are 4 objectives of this plan. Firstly, it's to enhance safety and accessibility. The street should be and feel safe for all users. The complete streets concept, which I'll explain on the next slide, will partially or fully be incorporated into the design of many of these road infrastructure improvements. Educating and encouraging relates to educational opportunities and programs that promote active forms of transportation, as well as ridership. Examples of this include the Bike to Work Week, which is next week, public bike posts to safety secure bikes, providing information on safe cycling skills, and other related events that celebrate walking and cycling. They're all effective tools to raise awareness and encourage more people to get active. Creating connectivity asks where are the gaps in our sidewalks, our bike routes, our pedestrian crossing signals, off-road trails, and other crossings such as streams and creeks that could otherwise provide an intuitive, seamless connection to key destinations. Those being, for example, the hub trail, school, a park, a major shopping area. Transportation equity is it's due to the fact that our transportation infrastructure is heavily geared towards motorists. Not everyone is of age or has the financial ability to own a car. The ability to access the city is therefore limited. Same principle applies to those who depend on mobility aids such as wheelchairs, but encounter barriers because of such things as unsafe intersections, lack of curb cut, narrow pedestrian paths. So in the last slide, I mentioned that as part of the safety and accessibility objective, complete streets guidelines would be incorporated when improving certain mobility infrastructure. So complete streets is a transportation policy and design approach that makes streets safe, convenient, and comfortable for all users of the road. Cyclists, pedestrians, transit users, and motorists. And once again, of all ages and abilities. Past approaches to road design place too much of a priority on the convenience of motorists. So the graphic on the left illustrates the business as usual approach, where the first priority is to plan out the roadway for motorists, and then whatever space remains on the edges is then allocated to the other users of the road. The Complete Streets Guide takes a more holistic approach where the quality of life, safety, and so on are prioritized. So for example, and also where alternative modes of transportation are accommodated. So spaces from the get-go, sufficient space for trees that provide shade, benches, wide enough sidewalks, and other types of mobility infrastructure is planned out first. And then whatever remaining space is available within that right-of-way is dedicated towards motorists. I do note that a few years ago, an information session was held on to implement bike lanes in certain areas of the city. And city staff received a number of concerns with respect to cycling safety, and that was due to the fact that excessive vehicle speed was heavily noted, particularly the streets of Pine and Willow. So as a result, city staff was directed to look into how these complete streets guidelines or principles can be incorporated into these particular streets. And as part of this active transportation plan, a strategy on what to do with Pine and Willow will be created as well. So as an example, if anyone can recognize where this is Pine Street and McNabb. So this is not a complete street, but it would greatly benefit from being one. This is one of the most densest, if not the most densest neighborhoods in the city by population. You have commercial services around everywhere. You have bus service as well. There is no sidewalk on the east side of the street, which is problematic and unsafe for pedestrians and transit users. Many people cross the road from the bus stop to Food Basics, which is that building in green. There are no real safety mechanisms to facilitate that type of mid-block crossing. even trying to access that bus stop, you can see with this lady walking on an informal dirt path. That's not safe. That is not accessible to those with mobility aid, for example. Whereas to contrast that, we have Queen Street. Now, this particular segment is between Church Street and Churchill Boulevard, which is near the Bellevue Park area. This is a good example of a complete street. We have a number of different transportation modes. We have 3 lanes dedicated towards motor vehicles. We have painted cycling lanes on both sides of the street, as well as the hub trail or the multi-use path running on the south side of the street. And we also see there are a number of bus stops with real shelters. The only possible shortcoming really in this situation is the lack of signalized crossings for pedestrians to safely cross the road. However, in this case, as you can tell by the image on the right, recently a pedestrian crossover was installed to facilitate safe crossing movements for pedestrians to access Bellevue Park to the other residential areas just across the street. And to add a bit of context to existing conditions in the city, the city has approximately 380 kilometers worth of existing sidewalks, around 74 kilometers of existing off-road routes. The hub trail represents approximately 28 kilometers. And those secondary trails that typically lead to the hub trail, like the bike routes, the term spoke routes, are approximately 44 kilometers in length. From a statistical perspective, we see that 84% of commutes are done in personal automobiles, whereas a small proportion, about 5% or 5%, around 8%, are conducted with alternative modes of transportation, in this case, transit usage, walking, and cycling. The vast majority of trips do not take long to complete, which suggests that there is a great opportunity to increase active transportation usage, since it is much easier to commute by bike or walking when distances are short. And that's what this graphic demonstrates. It's pulled from statistics, and the vast majority of trips can be completed within 15 minutes. Now on to what we heard. So our project webpage includes a survey and an active map where individuals can pinpoint certain areas of the city where they feel that improvements to infrastructure are necessary, or areas that provide effective AT infrastructure and demonstrate a good standard to follow. Comments received include suggestions on where bike routes should extend to, where informal paths should be informalized by paving, safety concerns in particular areas, the need for sidewalks in neighborhoods that are frequented by children, even maintenance issues such as the need for snow plowing a number of these segments for better access year round. This slide is just a visual demonstration of the project web page. The right half of the image shows that interactive map. It makes the engagement process very more helpful, better, easy to for individuals to convey their message. So drop the pin, and you can even leave additional comments. We do have some stats on the left side of the image. Now, I know these stats were pulled some months ago, so they're probably a bit out of date, but it just goes to show you that so far we have shown a lot of good success with reaching out to people, getting people involved, participating with comments, and providing feedback. So a draft network of sidewalks and cycling routes have been created. This includes pedestrian crossing signals and off-road trails. But before I show these maps, I would like to explain part of the selection process and some of the issues that the plan attempts to address. So firstly, as part of the selection criteria, we look at what proposed routes will improve safety and accessibility the most. They should be designed to improve safety and enhancing accessibility for all. And of course, we're going to look at the degree of improvements compared to their current conditions. The routes should also be connected and continuous to provide a consistent, comfortable user experience throughout the city. Gaps in the network should be filled. As for feasibility, the routes that will be proposed will need to be feasible. If the cost is prohibitively expensive, or if the road has certain engineering constraints, such as too narrow to accommodate a certain AT infrastructure, then it will not be recommended. Multimodal also needs to be accommodated. So a good example of this is providing pedestrian and cycling amenities at bus stops and transit stations, such as secure bicycle parking, a bench, connected sidewalks, so that the transition from walking or cycling to boarding a bus can be made more seamlessly with lesser effort. And as for connections to key destinations, so key destinations, once again, those are your parks, schools, the hub trail, major shopping areas. And here also, I'll give some practical examples of how we evaluate the existing network. So this image is taken on Second Line and People's Road. So imagine someone trying to cross this segment, this crosswalk. That island is very small. It cannot accommodate someone. It can't accommodate much. If someone's traveling with children or has a stroller or a bike, it's difficult to maneuver on that. Of course, expanding this island would really strengthen this segment as a more reliable and safe route. To compare or to contrast this image, here's one image from Sudbury. We can tell what Sudbury did in this intersection. There's a defined visual cue for the crosswalk. There's also good signage that pedestrians are crossing. You have that bright orange and black and that yield sign. The median is much larger, as well as that turning lane is more narrow. And probably the turning radius is a bit more accommodating to better force drivers to slow down before making a turn, rather than being able to turn off at quick speeds and not having to have much attention to what's going around, such as individuals or whomever crossing this road. This is the east side of the Pym Hill. There's a gap in the sidewalk network. This informal footpath you can see here demonstrates the fact that it's heavily used. So formalizing this into something that's safer, a smoother, harder surface for people to travel on is something that would be definitely recommended. As for gaps, this is a hub trail leading into Fort Creek area along Carmen's Way. The hub trail is mostly a wide multi-use path. In certain sections, such as Mark Street, as well as here, it turns into a sidewalk. That can be that's being looked at to improve upon. But I do note these situations are kind of challenging because space is constrained between private property and other elements, such as these utility poles. It's very costly to move those poles, unfortunately. Touching base on multimodal, so bike racks on buses and safe locations to secure bikes at key transit stops would encourage more of that, more of those multimodal trips. You'd be able to bike to the bus station, secure your bike, board the bus, and then finish your journey by walking. Within the past few years, the city did improvements to this area, which is near the Cora Collegiate area, the Northern Community Center area. Traveling from the residential areas of Cooper Street to the west side of Gully Avenue was problematic. So to improve accessibility and connectivity, a bridge was recently constructed, and that bridge is located where I encircled in red. And then a smooth pathway was built, which is that line in red. As part of the AT plan, we're also looking at that an additional crossing on Gooley, which is encircled in yellow, just to make it, once again, make it more safe for pedestrians to cross. This is an active area given the amenity area, the surrounding residential areas, and the school. This is just a photo of that same bridge and pathway. This is just north of that commercial developments that includes Walmart, Home Depot, Best Buy. The issue here is, see what I encircled in that red dashed line? A lot of people use that pathway to access the commercial facilities. But in this condition, it's once again, it's not, it can be improved to make it safer, make it more easier to travel. And so finally, this is the candidate pedestrian network map. There's also another map for cycling, which I will show next, but just know that this is in draft form. The routes and infrastructure upgrades that have been proposed and seen on these maps will change pending further consultation with the public, stakeholders, and city staff. And I can also send higher resolution copies so you can better see this map as well. But the purple lines here represents existing sidewalks. The red line represents proposed sidewalks. And the blue circles are where crossing signals are recommended. You have about 25 of these signalized recommendations throughout the city. A high proportion of them, almost half, are located in the West End. The red and orange colored polygons represent school sites. And that's because we heard a lot from individuals that schools were not well integrated into the sidewalk network, which posed a challenge for children and parents going to such sites. Overall, the recommendation for the sidewalk network is to focus on gaps and provide access to destinations on at least one side of the road. As for the cycling and multi-use path network, the routes that run parallel to major roads with high traffic volumes and a high level of driveway entrances was recommended. Opportunities for trails along hydro corridors were also explored for recreational connections. Overall, about approximately 100 kilometers of candidate cycling and multi-use routes have been identified, as well as just under 100 kilometers of sidewalks. So all of these proposals are being investigated currently to determine their suitability to make it into the final AT plan. Now, because a lot is being proposed, some recommendations are more important than others. So a consideration that has to be made is what should be built first, what should be prioritized. And to make that decision, once again, we follow the principles derived from our the route selection criteria, our objectives, feedback that we've heard through our consultations, as well as looking at demographics and statistics. So for example, which parts of the city have the highest density, the highest population density. We look at student counts, even income levels. Oh, sorry. So I'll briefly explain some items on this map. The blue segment represents the hub trail. The dashed red lines represents the either a previously proposed cycling routes or candidate routes. Now, as I said, it is a bit hard to distinguish between what line is what. So I'll follow up with that later on. In terms of where the project is at and the next steps, I did mention that we were in the public engagement stage, collecting more information and then using that to revise the draft network. Specifically, the action items that have been completed to date are reflected in discussion papers 1, 2, and 3. And I briefly went over these discussion papers or the main points of it through this presentation. These discussion papers are also available on our website, so I encourage you to take a look at them. They're very informative and interesting. Discussion paper 3 is ready, but not yet on the project website, but it will be up shortly. Next steps reflected through discussion papers and action items. We will be touching base with tourism to see how we can align some of our plans with tourism, recreational opportunities. Then it's the implementation and review. And then that's followed by project engagement summary, which is where we once again take a look at all the information that's been collected and revise as necessary. I anticipate that the bulk of this project will be completed in the next couple of months. The final step for the project is once this active transportation master plan is complete, it will then go to City Council for review and approval. And a bit of a plug-in for another project the planning staff has been working on for the past few years is referred to as a nodes and corridor strategy. And that's part of the official plan project. The official plan is a land use document, a land use policy document, and it touches base on a lot of different components and topics ranging from growth and settlements to agricultural economy, the natural environments, where residential, commercial, and industrial or institutional development should be located or where growth should be directed towards. Now, as for the section on development, it is anticipated that this concept of nodes and corridors will be proposed. Nodes and corridors, those are the key areas that can better accommodate growth and development due to reasons such as nearby amenities, parks, schools, access to important retail centers, employment, transportation options. A related term that you may have heard of would be complete communities. So as an example, this is the area between Pine Street and Great Northern Road, the general area behind Cambrian Mall. It's a good example of a complete community or an area that would be a good candidate to be identified as a node. And the reasons for that is because it is centrally located along a major commercial corridor that includes various convenience stores, food basics, Rome's, pharmacy, banks. It's near major institutions such as Soo College, the Group Health Center, YMCA, as well as a diversity of housing options from single attached homes to townhouses to apartment buildings, both rental and ownership tenure. And there's also Rosedale Park providing good recreational space. So I just want to point it out there that there's always a land use connection to making active transportation as effective as possible. When you have things in close proximity to each other, it's easier to take a bike, it's easier to walk to get to your destinations rather than having to depend on a vehicle. Yep. And that concludes my presentation. The project webpage is the links to the project webpage as well as my contact information is pasted up above. So if there's any questions, I can be happy to take them, or maybe Paul or Ted can lead the discussion afterwards.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jonathan, for your presentation. And yeah, we do have some time here for some questions if there's any from anybody that's on the call. You can unmute yourself and ask Jonathan directly, or if you want to type something into the chat, that would be fine too.
Yes, Jonathan, I have a couple of questions. Is that I'm just trying to get my picture here. Downtown Queen Street. Do you? I know this is a big issue for cyclists, and so far I haven't heard that there's going to be any consideration for making bike lanes downtown Queen Street so far. And I, from what I've been told by engineering is that Queen Street has one lane of traffic all the way to, Church Street, and then it goes to 2 lanes of westbound traffic. And I was told that there's adequate capacity for 1 lane, and the other lane could be converted to bike lanes. Is that even being considered for Queen Street?
The specifics haven't been looked at yet, but that may fall under the overall Queen Street reconstruction project. And I do believe there's a public information session on that next week. I don't have to confirm the date, but that's being looked at more in detail, more in depth.
Okay.
But I know as part of the AT plan, the downtown itself and Queen Street would be recommended to improve active transportation infrastructure there.
So the principles of the complete streets principle that you said the city has will be applied for the new design for Queen Street, because right now it's it's a drag strip for cars and motorbikes.
Right. Yeah.
And I think
Totally.
it needs to be really, really considered. My
Definitely.
second question, my second thing is that one of the things that I've learned from reading, particularly the work of about walkability, one-way streets are really not good for pedestrians, and the downtown core has been optimized for drivers. Intersections and the street itself is basically hostile to cyclists and pedestrians, like we're looking at Wellington, etc. So one-way streets are not good for non-active transportation. I don't know why that should not be looked at. And the other one that's a big picture that I haven't heard mentioned is getting rid of 4-lane roads. 4-lane roads, I know we've converted Queen Street, we've converted Northern Avenue. 3-lane roads are safer. They move just as much traffic. They reduce accident rates by 40 or 50%, and then they provide accommodation for cyclists. So when you look at streets like Bruce Street, Pym Street, which you've mentioned, Pym Street is not a 4-lane road. Pym Street should be a 3 or a 2-lane road, and then there'd be lots of room to go up the hill and down the hill. And Bruce Street is a nightmare as a 4-lane road. So I think, according to recent statistics, that there's absolutely no room for 4-lane roads in any city. 4-lane roads just don't work well. 3 lanes are better. 5 lanes are okay, but 4 is just a no-no. And that wasn't mentioned either. And that would be a very important thing, I think, to consider in your study.
I'll bring that up. I do know engineering is looking at various road diets around the city. As you mentioned, converting them, reducing a lane. I'll make a note of that at our technical meeting, where if you can get more details on that.
Thanks, Andre. Think for a minute more, and I'm sure you'll have another question. Got a couple on the chat here for you, Jonathan, from Mark. He asked the same question as Andre in terms of will there be a bike lane on the new Queen Street reconstruction? And we had that. He's also got a question, will the Canal District be put back on the main hub trail?
So as I'll answer the first question on the Queen Street reconstruction. Once again, there will be an information session on the Queen Street reconstruction. They're looking at it from a very technical perspective, seeing what can be fit, how to improve upon it. So I can't comment on that. I think it'd be too early to comment on that, on the specifics now. As for the Canal District, the Canal District would be part of the and when you say back on the hub trail, I know it's connected through a network. But in terms of
so it's part of the network now, you're saying?
it would be part of the network, and there's also plans to rejig some intersections as well. But I do believe that is part of the hub trail.
And then you can see the other question there from Mark. Is there going to be a hub trail connector to the Rankin Arena and Batchewana Reserve? There are no sidewalks there.
Sidewalks were identified as a gap. I don't know if the hub trail at this point is going to be looked at to extend all the way there. But at this point, I believe it's at sidewalks. I think it'll be proposed to look into expanding the sidewalk or extending the sidewalks into that area. But in terms of the hub trail, I don't believe so.
So one other thing, Jonathan, you talked about it. I guess all of these ideas that people have here, the Soo Moves page with the interactive map, these can be comments that people and suggestions that people put into that map still at this point in time, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that's something for people to know. And I guess through the Soo Climate Hub, we'll spread that word on social media as well to let people know that there's the opportunity for input on some of these type of specific questions. Mark's got another one here. When will the hub trail be finished between the Civic Center and the Delta?
I'm not aware. I don't have that information to answer, but I can find out if there's any plans and the timing schedules, and I can get back.
Like, I don't know how. May
Carl, yeah, Carl.
Hi, Carl. My wife Lisa. Just noticing your master plan. We did add some stuff, but I work at a local steel plant, and I noticed bike racks there are the most used I've ever seen in the last 10 years. There's like 24 bikes. The one thing I noticed on your sheet, I'm just wondering, like, since it's the city's largest employer, and you're talking about hubs and getting people moving from schools and businesses and employers, was there ever an idea like a mini hub around the west end, like from Wallace Terrace lines up through that? There's a canal by Balfour Street all the way up to Core Collegiate to Rossmore, like, and then you could do a loop and connect it back on the top end to the hub trail by I think it's Pino, or by Elliott Fields, across the Pino Road. That's a really good loop to include the west end that doesn't have a lot of access right now.
Right.
Getting people to like area hospital, downtown, Soo's one of their larger employers, high schools. There's a canal right there that's not even, I wouldn't be surprised, like, is that city property? Can they build something like you did at Bellevue 2 years, like just put down a path by any chance? Is that being looked at by any chance?
I don't know if that's being looked at specifically. I don't believe so. With the exception of just general accessibility, just generally increasing the connections. But I don't know if that path has been explicitly identified.
That's kind of why, because I don't even see Wallace Terrace, because you've got a lot of space on the south side of Wallace Terrace. You can repave, like, you can even ask city employer, like, if they want to be part of the green initiative, they can even hand over like that. The one connection, you've got the underpass there, which is a hindrance. Like, look at Cameron's Way as like the Gardner Expressway to Toronto. Like, it's dividing the city right there with People's Road. And to include the west end of the city, you could build a nice mini, you could have access to the north end where Elliott Field is, maybe a crossover. And then I think in your slide, you have by where the Rexall, that's second line. That could be a crossover point, and down by Lines, Wellington, that could be a southerly. So you could have 3 major crossover points for people access, wheeled movers, pedestrians, cyclists, mobility, right? So
I'm looking at my at the map, and yeah, I do know what you're saying and how that bridge acts as a choke point, just because it's very narrow and it doesn't accommodate narrow sidewalks.
Is there some way we can, like, that idea could be included in this plan? Like, I noticed there's a lot of routes and everything going on, but there doesn't seem to be the usage of that canal, Cora, Rossmore, and Wallace Terrace. You can make another little mini loop, nice loop around there. Just a suggestion or whatever going on. So
So
that's a good suggestion to have when we review the proposal, the draft network.
Yeah, so this, Jonathan, I guess in addition to what's available online for people to put input in, I hope you can take notes from Carl and Mark and Andre so far that you might bring to some of the discussions you're part of moving forward finalizing the plan, right?
Yep.
Okay, good.
Thank you for consideration. or
Yeah,
whatever.
Thanks, Carl.
And if, so there's a project webpage. There's also my email address. If you want to just shoot me an email, whatever is easiest for you.
That's great. I had a question for you, Jonathan, just in terms of new subdivisions and so on. Is there any requirement now in this plan or in other plans that have been put forward to incorporate active transportation within new subdivisions, new builds? So we don't run into these situations, many bad ones that you pointed out with previous builds?
We don't have a policy that explicitly identifies that, so that doesn't mean that we don't do it. We every time there's a subdivision or a large scale proposal, we see where connections can be improved upon. But as an official policy, there's nothing yet. So even things such as requiring bicycle parking, that's something that is also being looked at, but no policy that underpins decisions, unfortunately, yet.
So is that something that's possible to go into this plan, or this that doesn't really include it in the scope of the?
It will
current
likely fall under site plan guidelines. We do have some elements that speak to accommodating certain forms of other active forms of transportation, but nothing to the same scale as what you would see in other cities at this point.
So that could be a weak point then, could it? I mean, something that the city.
It's a place to improve upon.
Yeah. Okay. Andre's, thanks, Andre, has typed in another question here. Is using rail corridors being considered for multi-use trails?
Yes, that is being looked at. I know that as part of the draft map, they are looking at opportunity to use that trunk road, that large rail, Wellington to Trunk Road. That'd be the major rail network.
Thank you.
Jonathan, also the connection to Jamestown that is being considered now actually takes the hub trail away from the canal district, but using the railway corridor there could actually loop in the Jamestown. So that would be a lot better, because I think that what's being proposed right now to connect Jamestown is a spoke, and unfortunately it takes people away from the canal district and the Whitefish Island, which is one of the highlights of the hub trail. So I think that if that can be considered to use the railway corridors, particularly for the Agua Tour train to loop into the Jamestown area, I think that would be very, very good.
Okay. I think there was an earlier, I can't recall when it was, but I remember seeing there was an earlier plan of utilizing that path. I don't know if it was canceled because it wasn't feasible, but I'll look more into that. I'll bring that up as a recommendation, something to look at.
I've got one more question, Jonathan, just in terms of the timelines. You talked about the fact that sort of that draft network would be finalized, I think you said in the next few months, right? The last few.
We have more of that public engagements that we want to ramp up.
And then that'll be finalized. And then what's the, and I mean, this is a pretty upper level question and maybe not easily answered, but just what kind of a timeline or what would happen after that? A prioritization of some of the routes and looking for funding to implement the construction, I guess. Is it a 30-year plan or a 5-year plan to?
It's well, it can be considered a long range plan. Could be 20 years, but that doesn't mean that it's going to take 20 years for the critical routes to be built. First, we will be looking at those important connection routes, and in terms of funding, where there are funding opportunities, the city will take advantage of it and apply for them. But there is a general budget as well, the city budget, that will be used to construct some of these routes as well. So it's not just dependent on an external funding application from a different level of government.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions of Jonathan? I want to let all of you know that have joined tonight that the Soo Climate Hub, this is going to be our last webinar. We're taking the summer off, so June, July, August. We'll be starting up the webinar series again in the fall in September. We've got a speaker lined up from Little Forest, Kingston, Joyce Hostin, who's going to talk to us about urban forests and rewilding within urban areas. So please be on the lookout for that coming up in the fall. And I'd like to say again, on behalf of the Soo Climate Hub, Jonathan, thanks so much for making the time tonight and giving us this presentation. And we really appreciate your time and effort.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank you for allowing me to share this. There's only so much that city staff are able to know about all these different improvements that can be made. So any opportunity to raise awareness, gain feedback is appreciated.
Great. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and appreciate your time. Have a good summer.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.